Good afternoon, and welcome to this special edition of Libertarian Counterpoint Podcast. We're coming at you on October 9th, 2020, right in the heart of election season. And this is going to be a special show where we interview a candidate for public office. But first, I'm going to introduce our panel to you. In our upper right-hand corner, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer from the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have Tim Everett, our screaming eagle of freedom. He is a pilot in the state of California. And joining us today in our lower left-hand corner will be James Just. He is a candidate running for California Assembly District 7. So we can't wait to hear what he has to say about some of that. But before we get to that, my name is Jason McPhee. I'll be your host. And thank you for joining us today on Libertarian Counterpoint Podcast. So let's get right into it. James, you are running for the 7th District of 7th California Assembly District in California. Did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself so the voters can kind of get a sense of who you are? You California native. What are some of the things you're interested in?
Yeah, I was born and raised here in California, here in Sacramento. I graduated John F. Kennedy High School, and I attended, a year at Cosumnes River College, and then spent most of my time kind of doing everything from running assembly lines to working in warehouses, washing dishes. I've kind of done all the work average people do that make this, our society work. And, during this time, I spent a lot of time in self-education. I was lucky. I had my family had a strong roots in education. My stepfather was a teacher, a science teacher at Luther Burbank High School, and he was also a researcher out at UC Davis. And he had a friend who happened to be a stereotypical absent-minded professor. And so I got to spend lots of times in a philosophical discussion about science and using the scientific process to self-educate yourself. And so I was not a good student at school, but I loved learning. And so he actually taught me how to do that on my own for myself. And so I was actually able to graduate high school on time with what might be a record low attendance rate of like 48%. And so,
whoa!
Yeah,
okay.
You can't do that today. They would not allow you to do that today. But I didn't cause trouble, and I passed my classes more or less. And so it's, they allowed you to do that back then. They didn't force. I had an anxiety disorder, which was not known. You didn't know about anxiety disorders back in the 80s, in the 70s
Right.
and 80s. So we didn't know that school environment was bad for me. But we know that today, and yet we're still forcing kids to that school environment. And
well, James, that's one of those things where I think it's kind of interesting because I didn't know this about you before, but I also had a similar experience near the end of high school where I also didn't attend a lot in my senior year of high school, but I finished. They had night school courses and other things, and I finished up about the same time. But yeah, maybe that's a kind of an indictment about the school system. But I'll let you get back to your.
Well, no, it's actually that's a good thing to bring up because the schools are a big issue right now because with coronavirus and distance learning, we're actually trying to find out that, a lot of kids need different things to be best educated. We've seen kids who you thought maybe I've seen parents who thought maybe their kids should be homeschooled or do distance learning, but when their schools were taken away, they said, no, my kid needs to go in school. He thrives in that school environment. But I've also seen other parents who were very big on the traditional school environment. They saw their child come home and completely thrive, become a whole different student under the distance learning environment. And so you're going, now, if we were smart, we'd take a look at this and say, okay, we need a more flexible educational environment.
Indeed.
We need an environment that works for the individual student, not for the system. And that's kind of the thing when I went through school. That was my biggest education in going through school, was that the system cares more about the system than they care about the children. And I'm not saying that the teachers care more about the system than the children. That's not what I'm saying. The system, the bureaucracy, the politicians, they care more about the system than they do about the individual child. And you can understand back 100 years ago when information was expensive and slow, why we created a system like this. But now, where information is essentially free and it's fast, there's no reason that we should be stuck in a education system that's not flexible enough to meet kids like me who have anxiety disorders or have, issues where they need to be in school. We can have this flexibility. Like I struggle with things like algebra, and so I need in school instruction for that. I need an actual instructor. But history, science, a lot of these things I can do on my own. And so we need to have a flexible education system. And so if there's anything of why I'm running, it's that we have such a simplistic mindset. I call it a command and control mindset in the political system these days, that it's kind of destroying our culture. We are taking a one-size-fits-all approach and imposing it on all of society.
James, what you're saying is a really good point, especially given our current situation. But in terms of the overall system of how education is designed here in the United States, well, let's stick to California for the time being. What do you feel about school choice and charter schools, and giving parents more choice and flexibility in terms of where to send their children to be educated? How do you feel about that, given that you're running for the legislature right now?
Well, school choice is very important. I mean, if you can't choose where your child goes to get an education, or what type of education you want your child, then somebody else is doing that. And you have that fundamental right to make that decision for your children. But if our charter school system is simply a carbon copy of the public school system, we're going to end up in the same spot. So we have to completely rethink about how we deliver. Choice isn't. If it's a false choice, then it's not really a choice. If you're showing a public school system or a charter school system that simply looks the same with different employment rules, then you're not going to get a different result fundamentally. We have to completely rethink about how we structure education. Our schools should become community resource centers that have a small school attached for people who go there who need that in-person education. But for others who need it for a class or for two, they can go there and use it. These things should be open almost 24 hours because our society is no longer a 9-to-5 society. I mean, as a janitor, I would work 3 different jobs over the course of a day. And so, 9-to-5 school didn't work for me. It would have been better for us if my kids would have gone to school at like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I could have picked them up at 9 o'clock in the evening. That would have been my school day. That would have been my work day. And so, but our schools don't work like that. Our schools work for the system, not for the parents and not for the students. And so if we really want to help working class people, we need to make our schools more flexible so it works for them. But not just on the education, but on the time.
It sounds like you're really open to having competition in schools, essentially what you're really after, and not a top-down command and control, but, let 1,000 flowers bloom, I guess.
Yeah, I think we use the competition is probably the wrong word. I know what we mean by that, but I want experimentation. I want people to be allowed to experiment on how is best to educate their children. And yes, the cream will rise to the top, and we view that as competition, but it's not really competition. No one's competing. We all want our children to be educated. That's the goal. No one's competing for that. We just want to figure out the best way to educate the individual child.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Well,
it is clear that the government always comes up with these one size fits all, and then they mandate it to everyone, and it never works. So I can see the way you have articulated your position in terms of more flexibility rather than competition per se. I could understand the concept you're articulating here.
Yeah, well, and the problem with mandates is that they come with punishments rather than support. I was working with a water district, and they had there's a change in how we are forcing some of these rural departments to change how they pay for water, how you pay for water. They're forcing you to go on a meter system, which is okay, fine. But they're also changing things like how they measure chromium in water. And I looked at this, okay, it makes sense. They wanted to measure it more sophisticated. But rather than saying, okay, here, we want you to measure this differently, here's some support, here's how you do it, and here's how we're going to help you communicate this change to your customers, they just mandated you change. They said, if you don't hit this change, we're going to punish you for it. And by the way, we're not going to give you any help helping you communicate why this change is important to your customers. And so the customers come to me and says, hey, our water district is kind of behaving badly. And I go look at it and says, no, they're not. They're being forced to do something by the state. It's actually not unreasonable, but no one gave them support to transfer this knowledge to you. And so now you're mad at the water district rather than mad at the assembly where you should be mad. And so where they get mad at the wrong people. And so it's built this level of distrust. And so now no one trusts anybody anymore.
Well, I guess given your background, and your exposure to education, and also in this distrust issue that you brought up with government, are these some of the issues that have got you interested in politics, or are there other interested? What led you into politics?
Well, oddly enough, when I decided to run for office, I actually tried 2 years ago. The Libertarian Party asked me to try and do a late-minute run for office, kind of the same way I did it this year. And I said, yeah, sure, kind of being naive. And we didn't make our signatures, but it was a great learning experience. And so when political operatives started talking to me about, I guess it was about a year ago now, I decided, no, I don't want to do it. They have their own motivations, right? Political people have their own motivations. The party cares about the party. Other political operatives cared about, making other people spend political money. They didn't care about me or my issues. But what happened this year is I was coming home from actually recording an episode of the TV show Counterpoint and buying soda and milk, and a fellow gig worker says, what are you guys going to do about AB5? And I didn't have a good answer for them. And so after about a week of not being able to sleep well, I decided, well, I can actually do something. I can go find somebody to run for office. Nobody else was trying to run for this seat. Nobody else even tried. And so I went and I looked. I went to Republicans and I looked. I went to independents and I looked. I looked to all the libertarians I knew who are politically interested to see anybody want to do it, and they didn't want to do it. They either didn't want to put up with the campaign finance laws. It's too complicated. They didn't want to learn, or they didn't want to, have a political fight and lose, because in this district it's half Democrat, and anybody who's not a Democrat has a long, hard road.
Well, speaking of the district, maybe now's a good time to share with our viewers an image of what the district is that we're talking about. We're talking about Assembly District 7, and so that essentially is a big portion of Sacramento County. James, did you want to elaborate at all about the specific areas it covers?
It covers a lot of Sacramento County, downtown Sacramento, some of the outline. It doesn't hit any of the suburbs, but kind of the major Sacramento. It gets Rio Linda, Alberta area, so it gets a little bit of rural, and it gets the downtown West Sacramento area as well, and out 50 to about Watt Avenue, and then it gets a bunch of weird, I don't know. As you can see, there's a bunch of weird coves and cuts and gerrymandered. Some of those gerrymandered lines actually make sense, and other ones don't. You know how these kind of political works. But it's mostly Sacramento, city of Sacramento. I think there's, Rancho Cordova, Rio Linda, Alberta. There's a handful of other communities involved, but it's largely Sacramento.
But when most people think Sacramento, this is what they're thinking, essentially the district that you're running
it's
for.
It's the Sacramento metropolitan area.
Right.
Center City. It doesn't get to Elk Grove to the south. It gets to, about Fruit Ridge Road, but maybe a little farther in some areas. And a little less farther. It's kind of the major city. And a little bit north. As you can see on the map, it goes a little bit north to the rural areas up into the farmlands.
So, James, given the our current situation, which is, of course, the pandemic, and, you got quite a lot of territory to cover in District 7, how is your campaign managing this now? What are you doing different, I guess, than you would have done if there was no pandemic?
Well, our original plan was to do community center meetings. We were just going to rent community center for halls, rooms, once a week, once every 2 weeks, however we could afford, and have community meetings. And we haven't been able to do that because community centers have been closed. So we essentially just switched everything to virtual. We decided to essentially run a Facebook campaign and add it with a kind of an old school. We went back old school to a whisper campaign. We're asking people to simply talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, and say, hey, just go check them out. We're not doing a hard sell. I'm not doing traditional campaigning because, frankly, I would have lost anyway. And so I get to do something that is completely different. I get to be open and honest and completely transparent in a way that other candidates don't get to be. and we're just going to let the chips fall where they may.
Seems like masks might actually interfere with the whispering campaign. For James.
Yeah, well, hey, maybe it'll help. You know, maybe it'll help. People can whisper a little better. Your voice doesn't travel so far. You can just whisper in your neighbor's ear. But going back to the pandemic, we've had, I live in my community I live in is a high person of color community, and it's been hit hard by the pandemic. And so not just from a health perspective, from an economic perspective, a lot of this low economic workers, unless you're stocking shelves or like my daughter does, if you're a bartender or a waitress, you've had a very difficult last 6 months. And so that's a large group of people in my district. And when we look at someplace like Sweden, who had the same data we did, made different choices early on, and everybody kind of vilified them, but now they've gone through it. You look at videos and pictures from Sweden, and they're eating at restaurants like normal. They don't even put masks on buses, which, quite frankly, I would suggest you wear a mask if you go on public transportation,
Sure.
But Sweden doesn't even do that. And yet they are through this. They now have a lower death rate than the United States. They now have a lower infection rate than their neighbors in Europe, and a lower death rate than most of them. And so it's, you can understand the panic. I actually don't want to misjudge people for the panic, because early on we had bad data and we didn't know. So I can understand the panic, but there's no reason to continue on this draconian approach to the COVID situation. We need to get back, let Californians, give them the data they need so they can get back to their lives.
Well, I have always made a case that we take precautions, but we do not need to lock down the economy to do this. The social distancing, we wear the mask. When we come home, we wash our hands and probably take off our clothes if we want to do that. That's fine. But take the precautions, but not the lockdown. And that the lockdown have been punishing, and so many people. And that is one of the causes of the pandemic that nobody's talking about. Everybody want to talk about the deaths, but nobody want to talk about the other cause that is associated with the pandemic. But I don't want to digress too much because
that's just a good thing to bring up, Leon. French President Macron, they asked him if he was going to lock down again, and he said no because the collateral damage was too high. So
there you go.
So there are people who realize that, between the mental health crisis that comes by from people being locked down. I saw a story today about a protest at a retirement, a nursing home in Colorado, that they said the residents were saying they'd rather die of COVID than loneliness. And so they're taking the emotional toll that this is taking on people has not been considered by the leadership, and and not just the emotional control, but the emotional toll, but the societal and cultural toll.
Yes.
We are starting to hate each other because that person's not wearing a mask. It's becoming toxic. Our politics was toxic enough, and now it's kind of seeping into our daily lives, and I find it very distressing.
Well, and this highlights the fact that we all have different values, and it poses different risks on each of us as well. So this one size fits all solution is really, just quite an imposition. But I didn't want to. We're getting a little bit late in the show, and I didn't want to lose too much time for you. I'm talking about a few issues that are important to you for District 7. If you wanted to focus on a couple issues for us, what would you like to talk about?
Well, our single biggest issue is why I'm here, and that's the disastrous consequences of AB 5, and we have to find a way to get around it. The biggest problem with that was the lack of transparency. It essentially happened without gig workers having an input. It was all done because unions, who represent less than 9% of non-government workers in the state of California, have undue influence. And a lot of people complain about money in politics, but you can solve that money in politics problems by voting for people who don't get it. I've deliberately not asked for money from even my own political party. I was talking to our chair at an event the other day. She says, we were surprised you didn't ask us for money. And my response to her was, I found a way to run for office without needing it. But kind of the real answer is, if I ask them for money, then I become like every other politician. And so I'm not going to ask them for money. If they want to give me money because they support my cause, great, I'll take it. But I'm not going to ask for it. because if you ask these big money donors, whether it's your party, whether it's the traditional big money donors, they view that as an investment and they want something for it. And things like AB5 happen because of that. And so the only way to circumvent that is to circumvent it.
Why do you suppose Prop 22 had so many added things to it instead of just being a repeal of AB5, which to my thinking would have been a simpler and more effective tool for bringing the most, everything that gig workers had in the past would have brought it back with just the repeal of what took it away. So why do you suppose Prop 22 is so much more than just a repeal of AB5?
Well, because Prop 22, which while I support Prop 22, I wish we didn't need it. Because quite frankly, I figure Prop 22 is like cutting one leg off, but AB5 is like cutting both your legs off. I'm not, as a gig worker, as someone who is driven for Uber and Lyft and does app-based gig worker, I don't like either solution. But 22 is better than AB5, so I'll take it. But the reason it's an Uber and Lyft bill, and they were simply trying to save their own business model. You can't, they're the ones who are investing in getting it put on the ballot. They're the ones who are investing the money in doing all the marketing, so they're going to arrange it in a way that suits them.
Yeah.
Trying to find a way to do what the 310 now different industries that have been affected by AB5. It's probably too much to ask of Uber and Lyft and DoorDash to kind of pull that together. It's political realities.
And for our listeners, I just wanted to clarify, AB5 was mainly developed in the state legislature, and it was focused on Lyft and Uber initially, to try and, but it hit everybody.
They used Uber and Lyft as the excuse.
Yeah.
And they hit everybody. It was just cover. It's the SEIU and the Teamsters wanted to get in on industries that they don't have a foot in the door in, and this is a way to force people to join unions. It's I forget the name of the decision that made it so state workers and other people
the Janus decision.
This is all a result of Janus. This is just the side effect of Janus. And because the whole Dynamics decision was based on one guy who worked 15 hours as an independent contractor for a trucking company. It didn't even have the Dynamics decision didn't even have anything to do with Uber and Lyft. But the California Supreme Court literally wrote law. They made up this test, the ABC test, all on their own. And then so the legislature, rather than telling the courts to take a hike, you don't get to write law, they encodified that law. They encodified that court decision into the law, and it's been disastrous.
Well, and to be honest, in this time of COVID, where we have literally crushed so many jobs, I can't think of a better way for the economy to get back on its feet than making it easy for people to go and work somewhere, to not have a lot of restrictions on them. And, so I hope for the best for you in your effort to try and get rid of this terrible law here.
It's the art communities. The community arts have actually been the hardest hit. Again, it's back. The cultural destruction is actually going to be worse than the economic destruction.
It's true. Yes.
Because the small theater groups and the small community groups and the small groups that for artists and musicians, those are going to go away, or at least be greatly reduced. And so those are where people. Those are training grounds for people. Or those are fulfillment for people, and so you're just taking so much away, and they didn't even think about it, which is really the most disturbing part.
Well, the legislature never think about anything. They just want to put forward the agenda, and the rest of us have to live with the crap.
And an insanely simplistic mindset is really a problem we're having these days.
Yes.
And it's myopic. It's focused on one thing at the exclusion of all others, like. Not to bring it back to COVID thing, but this damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, 100% effort being focused on a single virus is myopic, and we're seeing the results now.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Yeah,
target fixation is dangerous. It makes you lose situational awareness.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it is. Target fixation. Okay. And so, but back Oh.
Well, it's near the end of our show, and it's been a great show so far. But we like to wrap up with something kind of crazy in the political realm or in the public that somebody has said. And so recently, we just got through the vice presidential debates that occurred on Thursday night, or was it Thursday or Wednesday? Well, it occurred earlier this week, anyways. And it was something happened near the end of the debate. It was actually much more interesting debate than the first one between the presidential candidates. But near the end, Mike Pence, who has very white hair, had a fly land on his hair, and it was so apparent because his hair almost looks like painted on white hair, so you couldn't not help but notice. But one of the interesting things, there's been a lot of commentary about it, and so CBS this morning host Gayle King said something kind of odd about the fly landing on Mike Pence's head. And she said at one point when they were talking about systemic racism, I think it's very interesting timing that a fly would land on Mike Pence's head at that particular time when he had said there really wasn't systemic racism. I saw the fly basically going, "Say what?" I mean, it was very interesting. That was, I don't know what to call that highlight. But that was certainly a memorable moment. So just kind of an odd thing, always something about race going on in these things.
So flies speak English now, is apparently.
So,
I didn't know flies could speak English. I learned something
Telling
new
you,
every day.
yes.
I didn't watch the debates, but I did have a response to the response of the debates. I said, well, Team Blue, I was watching the response from my timelines, and everybody who's kind of on Team Blue saw Blue, Kamala Harris won. Everybody on Team Red said Pence won, and everybody else was talking about a fly. And so I figured that's about as interesting as the debate was.
Yeah, the fly won, definitely. This goes along with Mother Nature being angry and causing fires and hurricanes because Trump is in office. So a fly is part of Mother Nature. Don't you know that the fly is landing on top of Pence's head to whisper in his ear, whatever you're saying is wrong, you dumb Republican.
You could always, Gayle King, you could always count on these liberal elites to talk their crap, and it's always about race. Race is always their selling point. They're going to save us, they're going to save all of us. We so-called people of color who need their help. We could always count on these people. So please, Gayle King, continue. All will do nothing but re-elect Donald Trump. That's all they're going to do.
Okay, well, our politics clearly has some bugs in it, but with that said, well, thank you for joining us, everybody, and we wish the best of luck to James as the race comes on the election. It will be on,
Good luck, James.
November 3rd.
Good luck, James. We wish you all the best. Go for it.
And we certainly endorse James wholeheartely on this show. So thank you, James.
Yeah, in full disclosure, I'm your director, so you guys kind of have to be nice to me.
When the show ends, we'll tell you what we really think.
All right. Thanks, everybody.